The What to Read Next podcast helps you build a TBR of future favorite books. In each episode, Lori and Maine interviews authors and book influencers to recommend books they loved for you to pick up today. If you're an avid reader, always looking for your next great read, then the show's for you. Hi, Rebecca. Welcome to What to Read Next podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So happy to have you here. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I am an author. I have previously written 4 young adult novels, but my adult fantasy debut, A River Enchanted, will be coming out on the 15th, which is very exciting. But if you had asked me when I was a kid years ago, what do you want to be when you grow up? I would have said author. Like, I knew from a very early age that I wanted to write and publish books. And I think it just stemmed from my love of reading. Like, I was a voracious reader. So I just feel so honored that I have the opportunity to write full time. It's been wonderful. Also, it's hard too, but it's something that I love doing, storytelling. But a few fun facts though is I have an Australian Shepherd named Sierra. She once was like addicted to Frisbee. She actually was so good at catching it, not like the hard Frisbee, but the soft Frisbee.
Yeah.
She is now 11 years old. So we had to retire Frisbee a few years ago because she kept injuring her legs. But she's like my little companion, and she's good to have around because she makes sure I get up from my laptop and go outside and go for a walk. But I also love gardening, reading, obviously. I love the mountains, and personality wise, I am an Enneagram 4 and an INFJ. So I don't know if you know your Enneagram number or not. You do?
Yeah, I'm a 7 and I am an INFP. So
okay,
we're similar, but we're different of judgment and perception, I think it is. So the P and J. So
good. I'm glad you know your Enneagram, because sometimes I give this little fact and people are like, what is that? Like, what is Enneagram? So it's always nice to meet a fellow Enneagram person.
I love it. It's so popular in Instagram. Like, I did not know what Enneagram was until I started seeing people's feed about it. And I was like, I just go down the rabbit hole. I'm like, where does this pretty graphics all about personality? And then there's like all these Enneagram accounts that tell you like what your personality looks like in pretty graphics,
Yeah, I love those too. I can definitely go down the rabbit hole too, like looking at those graphics. But.
Yeah. So I got so many questions to ask you. But first of all, like, so did you always wanted to write fantasy, or do you had tendency something else? And like, what was the transition like from YA to adult fantasy?
So I have always been a fantasy writer. I grew up like reading the Chronicles of Narnia, Tolkien. So I was like very epic world, fantasy world. So, but the transition from YA to adult, it kind of was just like a very seamless thing, almost like it was meant to happen. And it's funny because when I was writing A River Enchanted, I did not set off to write an adult novel. It just kind of happened very organically. And so when I'd finished drafting it, I was looking at it and I felt like some pieces were YA because that's what I know and I'm familiar with, right? So it's like I'm drawing on that familiar pieces of my writing, but then I could also see that there were parts of the book that were very much adult and were different themes that I hadn't touched on yet. So I just felt like the best thing to do was to revise it with it being more of an adult novel in mind and try to elevate the YA pieces. But it was kind of scary because I was like, I've never been on submission on the adult side of the markets. This was like a big jump for me. Like, it might not sell, like, so it was a risk, but thankfully it found an editor who loved it. But for the most part, like, all the editorial process and everything has just been very similar to YA. But I do feel like it has opened up my world a little bit more because even though a lot of adults do read YA, there are some that don't, so hopefully just continue to just kind of broaden my horizon and reach new readers with this book as well.
Yeah. And I think sometimes readers, I noticed there's a transition between young YA to going out to adult. And there's like all these readers from the 2012s, the Gen Z, the Gen X, the millennials, I'm older millennials, but it's the millennials that grew up reading them. They're like growing up to now reading like adult themes, books. So there's like an audience there who's like,
there is,
and like, oh, there's actually something that's meant for me to read now, that's not just YA. So
yeah, exactly.
I love this. I love this market is it's growing. The fantasy market is growing. So talking about A River Enchanted, tell us the elevator pitch. What is it all about? Why should we
Okay.
buy it?
So I'll tell you like the one sentence, which is so hard to boil it down to one sentence, but it is a grumpy bard must team up with his childhood enemy rival to discover why young girls are going missing on their island. And to expand on that a little bit, our protagonist is a bard named Jack, who was born on this very magical island, but was sent away when he was young to study music on the mainland. So in those 10 years, he's been away from home. He has really distanced himself from his clan. He's estranged from his mom, and he's just decided that he will never go back home and he'll just stay on the mainland studying music, teaching music. But one day this letter arrives and it's summoning him home instantly, and it's been signed by his laird. And the letter says, bring your harp immediately upon receipt, and you must, come home. So of course he can't disobey his laird's order. So Jack decides, well, I have to pack everything up and leave everything here and go back and see what's the deal, And so, but when he gets back home on the Isle, he realizes it wasn't his laird who summoned him, but the laird's daughter, Adara, who, when they were children, they hated each other, as kind of were like little like enemies with one another. And so Jack is like, oh my gosh, like it's Adara, like how dare you bring me back home for like, but then he realizes that Adara, there's a very sinister problem on the island where these young girls are going missing from the clan, and Adara thinks that Jack's music can help her solve this mystery. So as they begin to work together, they realize they might make better partners than rivals. So but of course, they begin to kind of unravel the mystery as well.
Yes, and just mystery ensues, So what was the process of building this world? Like, what is the process? I think in some ways, is it easier to do world building? What comes first, characters, plot, or world building?
So with all of my other books, the character always comes first. So I find that I'm very much a very character-driven type of writer. But with this book, it was very unusual because I saw the island first. So I envisioned this very misty, moody, magical place. And it looked like the Isle of Skye. So I already kind of had the Scottish inspiration. And I was like, this place is very intriguing. Like, who are the people who live here? So from there, I started kind of digging. And I found Torrin and Sidra, who were originally going to be more secondary characters. But as I was writing, of course, they kind of took over quite a bit of the story, and it was a very compelling story. They have a marriage of convenience, and so seeing them work through that, and that was like very much the adult feel of the story was driven through them. But then I found Adara, and I was like, okay, I feel like I'm still missing one more character. Who is this? And then I found Jack. So it's funny how like my main protagonist was like the last main character like I found, because the story is very epic and there's multiple points of view. So between Torrin, Sidra, Adara, and Jack. But Jack is kind of the vocal point because we are with him as he's returning and seeing what the Isle, what has happened on the Isle when he's been away. So yeah, this was a very interesting, the way the story unraveled. It was different from my other work, but it made me realize that the island was going to play a very pivotal role in the story, almost as if it was a character itself.
I love this. I love when you think about it. The setting, it just makes an impact of how this is gonna grow. Like, the story is gonna move forward because of the setting. That it's not just something just to be where we're living, but it's actually helping the story tell you what happens next.
Yeah, it's very interactive with everybody. So
yeah. And so what was it like to write multiple point of views? Like, was it any easier to get into character? Like, what's the process for you?
So it was surprisingly easy. I have written like dual narratives before, but I had never quite branched out until like 4 different points of view. And there's even a 5th. There's one more point of view, which I won't say who it is because it might be somewhat of a spoiler. And they don't have that much storytelling as Torrin, Sidra, Jack, and Adara. But and I will say this, that originally Adara did not have a point of view. So it was really interesting. And one of my feedback was like, hey, Adara feels very like cold and reserved, and there is a power imbalance between her and Jack. Like, what do you think about adding her point of view in so readers can really understand who she is and like really get into her head? Because she just felt very walled off. And I
Mhm.
was like, that's actually a really good point, because I didn't want readers to feel disconnected from her, because
Mhm.
even though she's carrying a lot as the heiress of the clan, like she has a lot of vulnerability, and feelings for Jack are kind of they're shifting, and how that dynamic's going to be. But I found like with Torin and Jack and Sidra, like all three of their voice came like so easily to me. Like I could write from their point of view all day. I added Adara, and she was a little bit tricky. Like it took me a while to kind of figure her out, and how to put like where to put her chapters in the story, because that's some of the tricky thing with multiple point of view, especially if they're all kind of experiencing the same thing. Is like you have to choose who is going to see what, so then you're not constantly recapping when you like shift over to another character, because that kind of bogs things down. But I felt like it was just amazing how like all these pieces came together for the story, because it just felt very effortless to have all of their points of views, and how they almost balanced or contrasted with each other.
What's this? So we're switching gears. Let's chat about some of your reading. So what kind of books do you tend to gravitate in terms of reading?
Fantasy books. I love fantasy books so much. I feel like as a writer, I have just learned so much about writing by reading.
Mhm.
So I will always gravitate to fantasy. Sometimes I do also like picking up historical fiction.
Mhm.
And I want to read more contemporary. Typically, I just don't gravitate towards that as much, but I'm always very open-minded. But I will say recently, it's been kind of hard to find a lot of reading time just because of, I have, now that I'm doing adult books and YA, like I feel like I'm constantly going from one deadline to the next. But
Mhm.
whenever I have a free moment, I always love to read, because I feel like it just kind of refills my well and it kind of keeps me going.
I love this. Do you have any books you recommend our listeners to pick up?
Yes. So I have three books I want to recommend. And I was trying to think of like almost like a theme of like books I wanted to recommend. And so these three books have really amazing plot twists or plot reveals. I always love when a book can catch me by surprise. Sometimes I think when you read a lot, sometimes you see stuff coming. But even if like you can like pick up on a few threads like you predict, I still love it when an author can completely make my jaw hit the floor. So
Mhm.
these three books, like I said, have amazing plot twists, plot reveals. So the first one is N.K. Jemison's Broken Earth trilogy,
Mhm.
and it starts with the fifth season. This is a very intricate, spellbinding story, and it has a very unique narrative structure. And I cannot give too much away, because it's almost best to go into this book not knowing too much, because that's kind of the magic of it. You're kind of just thrown into this world. It's very like apocalyptic, dangerous. The stakes are really high, and then as you're reading, though, you start seeing these threads and how they connect. And when the reveal happens, it's just one of the most like incredibly written books I think I've ever read. Like I was just like sobbing, and just like I didn't even know what to do with myself when I finished reading it. Thankfully, it is a trilogy, so I instantly went out and got the sequel. But just an incredible work, and I feel like this is categorized more as like a science fiction.
Mhm.
It deals a lot with geology and the rocks and the earth, and so it's a very fascinating read. So I highly recommend that one. The next one I want to recommend is Jellicoe Road by Melina Marchetta. Now, Melina Marchetta is one of my favorite authors. She typically writes contemporary, and she's one of those rare authors who can also write fantasy novels. And so one of my favorite trilogies is the Limitaire Chronicles, written by her, and it is a fantasy series. So if you were looking for another fantasy trilogy that's already out that you can binge, that one is also, all three books are out. But Jellicoe Road is a contemporary novel, which is again interesting because I don't normally gravitate toward contemporary, but I reread anything Melina writes, even her grocery list. So again, this is one of those stories I don't want to give too much away about what it's about. It is one of those books you want to go into not knowing too much, but I will say it has one of the most haunting first lines I've ever read. And as you are reading, again, it's one of those books when you first get into it, you're really confused and you're trying to figure out what's going on, because Melina just kind of drops you right into the story. But then you realize there are two narratives at play. And so once you begin to realize how they intertwine, again, it's like this very just like amazing, heartbreaking, wondrous moment. And again, it's just like, gosh, it's just so good. And I sat down and read that book in one sitting too. Like I just couldn't put it down. It was just that riveting. So highly recommend Jellicoe Road by Melina Marchetta. So my third recommendation is The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. I love how this book is set in a very glittering, dangerous realm of fairy. And I love how our heroine is this mortal human Jude and how she is determined to make her way in this world no matter what. And I think the political intrigue that Holly Black weaves together is simply incredible. I love reading political intrigue, but it can be so hard to read and also write. So I again, really admire her just being able to write it because there are so many pieces, so many players that you're trying to flesh out and give them motivations and not to confuse the reader. So I feel like the political intrigue is wonderful in this book. And of course, when everything happens, when the plot reveal happens, again, my jaw hit the floor. I did not see it coming. So it's this very fascinating story. And I love how all the characters are pretty much morally gray, but you still root for them. And I love the love story too, the kind of slow burn enemies to lovers. So yeah, those are my 3 recommendations.
And they're all complete trilogies, which is amazing.
They are. Yes. You can run out and get them all.
Yes. It's not like you have to wait and you're like, when is the next one coming out? These are completed.
Yes.
So, thank you. Tell us where you can find you online.
So you can find me on my website, www.rebeccarossauthor.com. I try to keep it updated. I'm a little bit slow, so sometimes that's not always updated, but all my information about my books is up there now. As far as social media, my main platform is Instagram. That is the one I just felt like I couldn't quite keep up giving all my time to all these different platforms. I was like, I'm going to just choose one that I enjoy the most and really channel most of my energy into that one. So it is Instagram. All my news breaks there first if you're interested in hearing news. And so you can find me at Becca J. Ross on Instagram. And then I do have a Twitter account, but it's mainly just for updates, and it's _ Rebecca Ross. And lastly, I want to mention that I do have a Spotify account, the same handle as my Instagram, Becca J. Ross, where I have a lot of playlists for my books. So if you are a reader who likes to listen to music either before, during, or after you read a book to kind of get the tone, you can go find them there.
Love this. I love the idea of the Spotify playlist. It makes it this adds a level of value to the experience. It's ambience. You're taking it with us.
Yes. And they are songs that I listened to while I was writing the book, revising the book. And so if you listen from start to finish, it charts the emotional arc of the story as well.
Oh my gosh, I love this. Well, thank you, Rebecca, for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you again so much for having me.
If you enjoyed this podcast, feel free to share with friends, subscribe, rate, and review the show. This is the easiest way to support the podcast. Today's episode's partner is Libra FM. If you're an audiobook listener, then you should add Libra FM as your go-to source for paid audiobooks. Libra FM makes it possible for you to buy audiobooks through your local bookstore. Memberships start at $14.95, and they also have great sales for romance audiobooks each month for $3.99, thanks to the Kiss Club. To sign up for Libra FM, please visit whattoreadnextblog.com/LibraFM. You will receive a free audiobook when you sign up for a monthly subscription. If you purchase a subscription through our link, you will be supporting the podcast at no cost to you. The What to Read Next podcast is part of the Frolic Podcast Network. Please visit frolic.media/podcast to discover new shows to tune in. Thank you so much for listening and have a great day.